and welcome to Ballinasloe Comic Con. Today we are delighted to have with us Eimear Noone, composer, conductor, one of the women who invented video game music per Wired magazine. She is also very well known for last year being the first woman in 92 years to conduct the Oscars. So Eimear, we are delighted to have you here with us today. Obviously you're from Galway, and you started off in the Ballinasloe Town Band when you were very young. So will you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm not just from Galway, I'm from 10 minutes drive that way from where we're sitting right now. Ballinasloe, Kilconnell, East Galway and Galway in general are just in my blood. We don't even know how long my family has been this side of the country, but it's home, and I had the great privilege to grow up somewhere really wholesome and safe, where people are kind. In fact, I was wholly unprepared for the big wide world because I was so used to just people being nice and all the time and empathetic and kind. And in a small town like this, I got to try out lots of different types of music, which really stuck with me because in film and in video games and in TV music, you're expected to embrace many different styles. And I was in the town band, which I loved. My own son is in it now. I absolutely adored that. It wasn't just about the music making, it was about the music making together with friends and the social aspect. But then I was part of the musical society here. We did everything. It was an amazing man called Noel Henry here, and we did everything from Calamity Jane to brand new musicals and things like Godspell from the 60s, and I got a sense of Broadway and all the different styles that went with that. And of course, we forget the great theatre where so many young Irish musicians get their experience from this size, and that's Mass. So in Kilconnell National School, you know, you're pulled out to play for Mass, for this, for that, for the other. And you know, this is some of our first performance experience. You know, my friends, my African American friends, would have grown up in gospel and all of that, and we think that's so cool. But we almost forget that we were playing at Mass and singing at Mass when we were that size. And all these things merged together. Of course, Kilconnell is a very famous, we have our own very famous traditional Irish music composer, and that's Paddy Fahey. We lost Paddy a couple of years ago at the ripe young age of 102, and at which time he was one of the most performed composers of traditional music in the genre. So I grew up in a village thinking that being a composer was a job that you did, and that's the thing, you know. It wasn't some guy in a wig. To me, it was my neighbour Paddy, you know. So that was monumental, I think. Just that whole, if you can see it, you can be it type of thing that you don't really think about. It's not conscious, but it's just there that, oh yeah, my neighbour does that, you know. And even though it was a totally different genre to me, today Irish music is definitely part of my voice. Broadway, some of the great band music. We played a lot of, we would have played Goodman in there. We would have played all kinds of American music in the town band. John Philip Sousa, and here in what was Ard Squelwera back here. We had our school orchestra, and you know, that's where we got I got some of my first classical music conducting experience. Was Sister Vianney, who was in her 80s when I was there. Whenever she wanted to sit down, she'd get me to get up and conduct the girls, you know. I was about 14, you know. So people forget, I think, that in a small town, if you want musical experience, you have to embrace everything that's going. And then you get this really diverse and broad experience. And that really, I think, is part of who I am today.
And you play multiple instruments, am I correct?
You know, I think when I was in college, everybody played piano, you know, every music student. But I had a scholarship to the College of Music in Dublin for 8 years, and I played concert flute. And I was one of the kids that went on the train So I'd go from Woodlawn at 6 in the morning, around 6 every Saturday. And there were 4 or 5 of us from Galway City and around. I think there's a couple from Athlone. And we'd head in for our music lessons at the college and the academy and spend the day doing our musicianship, our ensembles, and then come back down. So I have a degree in performance in flute, which which I rarely use, only on my own recordings, because I don't have to pay me, so that works well. I have a couple of weird things, like I have an electronic woodwind instrument called an EWI, which my husband bought me, where I can assign any sound imaginable that's synthesized to this woodwind instrument and play it into the computer. And so I use that one, piano, of course, and some guitar. So my job with the orchestra is to know what to expect from the different instruments, to know what to expect from a professional violinist or a professional cellist or a trumpet player or whatever, what the ranges of the instruments are, where they speak strongest in their range, like we do, you know, when we speak with our own voices, certain places in our voice, the timbre, as we call it, the colour, will penetrate or is strong. In other places, and in singing, the same thing, it doesn't cut through as much. I need to know where those places are in each of those instruments, and how to stack a chord such that everybody has their own sonic space and can speak and blend in a way that I've envisioned as a composer and an orchestrator. So I don't want to get too boring about it. I could go on and bore everybody to pieces, but anyway.
So when you're composing, are you mentally thinking about the themes on different instruments in your head, or do you start, you know, would you play it out on the piano first and then move it to a different instrument, or what's your process around that?
I do it multiple different ways. For me, I have to see the score. So I'm a little bit old school about that. And when I say I have to see the score, I'm looking at it on screen. We use notation programs. I did actually do one film where I hand wrote and hand transposed all of the parts for all of the instruments, and that was unforgettable. But because, you know, a film, the average is, you know, between 70 and 90 minutes of music. If you think of your average album, your average pop song, rock song is just over 3 minutes. So you can divide 3 into 90 for yourself and see how many songs that is. They have to be fully rendered, fully produced, fully recorded, all of those things. But we don't get a year or two to make them. We get a couple of months. So yeah, the film deadlines are intense, which is why you'll have an entire music department for a film. And my husband and I work together, and we work completely differently. He will try things out and you know, he will throw things, he calls it throwing things, and see what'll stick. I kind of hear things fully orchestrated when I think of a theme, or when straight away I pretty much know. And I can try other things, but I find myself always coming back to my first instinct. Now within that, once I have the meat and two veg of the music, I'll try different types of orchestration and so on. But even that, I'm hearing, if I go, what if I take this into 6/8? I'll hear it, and straight away I'll hear a specific orchestration. So I think part of that is the fact that I live inside the orchestra so much time in front of the orchestra and living with those instruments. But what I will do is I will visualize people playing them. So I'll see the bows moving, and I'll hear the key clicks on the bassoons, and I'll see fully the orchestra in front of me, and that's really helpful because it helps me to write more idiomatic music, which is, you know when you hear somebody say something in an Irish accent that isn't how we would phrase something, an actor who's the writer wasn't Irish, or you hear somebody, you hear somebody speaking a different language using English, but it's not it's correct, but it's not idiomatic.
Yes.
Music is the same way. I'll hear something, I'll go, that sounds like a keyboard part. Why have they the strings playing that? Or that sounds like, why didn't they, and you can tell often if a composer writes at the keyboard. Now I'll sit down and I'll bash around and improvise to see if something occurs to me or something organically comes about. But I'll transfer that very quickly in very raw form to my score, and I will work without the piano usually. It's freeing because I don't have to rely on what my fingers can do, and it releases my brain so that I can think more idiomatically about the orchestral instruments. I think you can tell when things, you write differently if you're writing for the synthesized orchestra, because there are weaknesses and strengths in that. If I'm writing for human beings to play it, I'll write exactly for each instrument as in its own accent, in its own voice. If I have to write for how a computer will synthesize those instruments, I have to consider the strengths and weaknesses. But I will do that also if I'm writing for a specific orchestra in a specific country, because I will know the strengths of playing and the traditions of playing in that country. So I won't write a very brilliant, a very virtuosic brass section part for a country that doesn't have the tradition of lots and lots of brass bands coming up and producing these brilliant orchestral virtuosi. I don't mean individuals, but I mean as a section. Or I won't write very, very dark string parts for a tradition where they don't sort of lay into the string heavily. That's not part of their tradition. So there's all these kinds of things, but for me, it's generally me sitting with the score, and there's a lot of thinking, or if I come up with something at the piano, I'll often stop. If I have a theme, I'll stop and think of what's the answer phrase to this? What are you hearing? What do you expect? And often it's just like a lunatic listening to silence, like a total lunatic. The postman is probably coming, and I'm sitting there going, and he's like, oh, what is she doing now? Total space cadet. But that's, for me, visualizing who's playing, and I'll even put people I know in that, visual.
And then, do you operate differently if you're composing music for a film than you would if you're doing it for a video game?
Coming up with the themes and coming up with the important little nuggets of ideas, that's the same. But I could be out for a walk and hear someone going by with a broken spoke in their bike and hear a rhythm that I run home and write down. Just anywhere you are, it's like we were talking about the creative's brain being like flypaper. Something will stick, anything, it could come from anywhere. But if the music has a function, when you're dealing with media, you are part of a whole. It's not a music video. It is a film or a video game that you are contributing music to. So you will first, you're like, what's the music supposed to do? The music has a function in this regard. What's it supposed to do? In film, you're working with a director on what is the music telling us right here. Is there a point of view that the music is giving? For instance, you have a guy driving home from work. The birds are singing, the sun is shining, he's driving through this beautiful residential area, and the music can do one of a few things, depending on the point of view. The point of view can be of the guy driving home in the car, and the music's all light, and it's all happy, and it's all bright, and that. Or the music can be omniscient, as in the viewer knows more about the situation than the character. So the viewer knows that he is coming home to some catastrophic event. So you can choose to play that scene a bunch of different ways. You can play it as the omniscient, looking at the guy in the car, and play it as this foreboding, oh my God, he's about to get the shock of his life situation. Or you can play against that and be completely in his head right now and playing his point of view, and then having the big, complete turnaround when he gets home. So it's all about the music's point of view and the function of the music in that moment. In video games, we have other functionality. And different types of music. So we have the cinematic, which is an animated film that sets up the story, the lore, the background, what you're supposed to be doing, especially if it's a game that is much more tactical. And the lore can be really, really deep. World of Warcraft has very, very deep lore. And watch out, a lot of these games, I'm not saying which ones, borrow heavily from Celtic mythology, if you don't mind. So there'll be that. Then we have in-game music, where we have a lot more freedom than we do in film. We're not worried about things like tripping over dialogue. You can't write a complex melody over somebody talking in a similar rhythm, or it's like noise. Yes. They rub against each other. We don't have to worry about the edit. We don't have to worry about an edit moving at a certain tempo or a turnaround. We don't know when dialogue's going to happen. And what we're trying to do is set up an emotional, we're trying to bring the player into the game, immersed in the game, not just intellectually but emotionally. And that's what in-game music, and that's a lot more freeing for the composer, because we can write big themes, big architecture in the music. We can do things that are a lot freer because we don't have to worry about edit or dialogue. Then we have music where the player's action triggers a certain change, and that's like a puzzle. And I've been quoted before as saying Mozart would write video game music, and I never say why I say that. Mozart loved puzzles. He loved musical puzzles in particular, and writing music for video game where there's an interaction with the character is a musical puzzle. So it'll trigger a certain change in the music, and we have to conceive of that when we're writing the music and record it accordingly. So to be very, very simplistic, you've written a big piece of music where you have the woodwinds, you have the percussion, you have the brass, you have the percussion, you have the strings, and say each of these have to work together as one big piece, but they also have to work independently of each other. So here's where the puzzle comes in. And if you have the character does one thing, the character's going along, we just have the strings playing. Something happens, it kicks in the percussion all of a sudden, and they work together. And they're not missing anything, they work perfectly as they are. But then something else happens where it kicks in the woodwinds, and they're doing their thing. And all of these three now work perfectly together. And then it kicks in the brass, and suddenly you have the whole piece. Or similarly, any two of those things working together, or just one by itself. So that's part of the puzzle. And we have one last type of music, we call it needle drop. We have this both in film and in video games. But in video games, it's more likely to be originally composed. You're in a room and there's a gramophone playing. And the music that's coming from the gramophone is something that we have to write. So that we call that needle drop. But anyway, so that's...
Well, because you brought up World of Warcraft, do you play the game?
I have to be careful because at the moment, I have an addictive personality. At the moment, my husband says to me things like, do we need to talk about your Duolingo problem? You know, because I'm learning Spanish. I was with my friends in Tenerife doing the Fimusite, amazing film and game music festival. And my friend got an award from the city of Santa Cruz, like the Medal of Honor of Culture. They were going to name a street after him. And I'm sitting there completely oblivious. And I went, I cannot live another day without speaking Spanish, because this cannot happen again, where one of my dearest friends gets this amazing award and I'm sitting there like an idiot, you know. So I've been like doing Duolingo like a ninja, competing with other people and all this craziness and being in a league and all this. So I can't play World of Warcraft because I will fall down the rabbit hole. So when we're working on the game, on different games, we get to cheat so that we can see what we're supposed to be scoring and all that kind of thing. But yes, I have met people that got married in World of Warcraft. Yes, I have. Yes, I have had proposals on stage at concerts. Yes, I have had people meet for the first time in real life, IRL, at concerts who have been in guilds in different games. And I've had mad things happen over the years. My American son is loving learning his Irish at the moment.
Is he using Duolingo for it?
He's doing it at school. He's using Buena Kainta, but he loves Duolingo. We're doing Spanish because, I do find it easier to pick up languages and accents in particular. And you know, I need to be able to take rehearsals with orchestras.
Yes.
I've got pretty good rehearsal French. I had one orchestra in particular in Cannes teach me the type of French you can't get from a book or a tutor. That's purely rehearsal French, you know. Le lever is the upbeat. I mean, nobody's going to teach you that. But I can do rehearsal German, rehearsal Italian, and now rehearsal Spanish, which, you know, and some rehearsal Chinese. But just as I can get through rehearsals.
That's the side of it I think most people probably don't appreciate, is that, you know, you'd have to speak multiple languages in order to be able to conduct your orchestras, and or, you know, at least to be able to. We tend to think of music as being a universal language, but you still have to do the actual communication when you're conducting your.
You still have to be able to say, okay, bar 5, beat 4, you know, brass, can you, blah blah blah. Now, orchestras are very international, but still in certain cities, in certain places, you can have hit and miss. You know, there's certain countries where you definitely, China, having the numbers, I learned all the numbers that I needed, and things like that. And it's showing respect as well as saying hello in the native language, and a little bit of Arabic, but fairly dodge to learn more. But it's fun because you're constantly learning and stretching yourself, and that's really exciting to me, to continue to learn. And you can't ever possibly know everything about music, you know, so that's exciting and terrifying.
Like, you have a number of qualifications in music. Do you think it's important for someone who wants to be a composer or a conductor to go through let's say the formal music route in terms of getting a qualification?
In Los Angeles at the moment, your waiter is more likely to be a composer than an actor. Wow. It's become, since technology has evolved, it used to be the domain purely of the traditional, classically trained, my tradition of composition and orchestration and so on. It used to be more that way. Now it's open across all the genres. I say always arm yourself with every possible tool that you can get. It doesn't mean if you're coming from rock and roll or jazz or a different type of music, you don't belong or you don't have every bit as much right to be there. You do. But get the skills. If you're going to be writing for music that needs orchestra, it kind of makes sense that you would play an orchestral instrument and come up through playing in orchestras and playing in band and studying traditional techniques. I mean, I'll give you an example. I spin out on a deadline. If you have something, you know how to write a fugue, because you can take one idea and spin it out quickly and have a cool piece of music written quickly because you have technique, and different types of counterpoint. Jazz musicians would have similar things with improvisation and using certain modes and so on. So for me, I'm fascinated by picking up tools from jazz musicians, which is my husband's background, and I'm constantly trying to get more tools. Arm yourself, you know. And that's you know, that's why I think whichever background, whichever discipline, getting as many skills as you can is really important, because the competition is pretty fierce. Yeah.
Well, I think that's very good advice for anyone who's watching. In terms then of, you know, obviously you compose, you conduct, which gives you, I would think, a significant advantage in terms of knowing exactly how things should sound, having them, you know how each section of the orchestra will need to operate in order to deliver your music the way that you want it. Would you have any recommendations for people who are coming up or maybe want to break into the field about, you know, what they should do to develop their skills? They may not necessarily be both composer and conductor, but are there any recommendations you might have for them around skills that they should acquire?
Yes, absolutely. We recently did a search for an assistant in conjunction with the Screen Composers Guild of Ireland, and they are a marvellous organisation, Irish Screen Composers Guild rather. So we went through the process of having a lot of submissions and seeing what was out there and what people were doing. And one of the things that we couldn't find was people using the tools that are available, the computerized tools, to create large orchestral scores. Because if you want to work in the world where we're dealing with video games where we have 90-piece orchestra and choirs and everything you can think of thrown on top of that, uilleann pipes and hurdy-gurdies and ram's horns and anything. We need to see that. The more established people need to see that you can render that. There are lots of great pure music courses, but postgraduate level is where it kicks into conducting and composition for screen. There is an excellent program in Columbia College Chicago. Both Craig and I taught on that program for a semester. What they do is they bring working composers, because it's pointless studying with somebody who isn't in the trenches, and getting people to teach in a university or in the trenches is impossible. So colleges that bring in people who are working and expose the students to them, and also, number one, that they have internships in the industry. So Columbia College Chicago is one, Berkeley, Valencia in Spain is one. Then in the States, USC, Berkeley, there's one in upstate New York, Eastman School. A friend of mine runs that program, Berkeley in Boston. And there's one, I think the Royal College or the Royal Academy in London. But always look for where these courses tend to be very, very expensive, and I didn't do any of them. So they need to be plonking you right in the heart of the industry in terms of internships. The other ones I'd say these are great because there are a couple of free things you can do. If you've been through college and you've done all of that and you say, look, I can't spend the kind of money to go to Berkeley. Columbia College Chicago, much more affordable, and they do have everything the others have. UCLA Extension is another one. So the things to join: Screen Composers Guild of Ireland, Irish Screen Composers Guild, IMRO in Ireland, fantastic. Screen Skills Ireland, fantastic people. I was a member of that as an up-and-comer. Then some of the programs where they plonk people into the industry. ASCAP Film Scoring Workshop is free and it's international. I'm a graduate of that one. There's the Sundance Institute is free and it's international. Universal have a diversity program where they take 8 composers every year and they plonk them, they work with the studios like Universal and like DreamWorks and all these different studios, and they'll take young up-and-comers and they will plonk them in one of those positions, and they'll surround them with a support staff to help them make the product and get their start. So they take, it's mostly women and people of color, so for that one. Let me see what other ones. There's so many fantastic ones out there, but those are the free ones.
That's great, because really we want, I suppose, particularly more women and girls getting involved in.
I have 2 more.
Composing.
The Society of Composers and Lyricists, you can join as an international member, I think. And GANG, the Game Audio Network Guild, both of them have free programs where you can be a student on the program. The GANG, Game Audio Network Guild, has a scholarship to go to the GDC, the Game Developers Convention, every year, where you're introduced to all the composers. You get to take part in a demo derby, so have your music listened to by lots and lots of game developers and meet lots of developers. So that's also free. So one of the things that my thing in Ireland is, can we please share information? I didn't know about any of these things. I went to Los Angeles knowing 2 people. I didn't know anybody or anything about anything. So please don't go the hard route. Did you get a mentor after that, or how pure? It was intense. So I couldn't drive either, which in Los Angeles is appalling. I learned to drive in one day and did my driving test the next day. And I couldn't really drive, but I still passed the driving test. That scared me silly. I was like, gosh, they give driving licenses to people who can't drive. I was on the roads like watching everybody else after that. I didn't know anybody. And I went to Trinity, and there was no, after music in Trinity, there was no follow-up. There was no introducing people to alumni. There was nothing like that. It was, there's your degree, see you now, you know. And I think there is a responsibility. Now, Trinity's philosophy is education for education's sake. That's fair enough. However, we do need to have follow-up, and so forth. So it was the Screen Skills Ireland. They were called something else at the time. We're bringing over professionals from Los Angeles to train us. So I was doing this alongside my degree in Trinity, to train us in the film industry, and it was a UCLA extension outpost, basically. And I did that for 4 years alongside my degree. But afterwards, they brought over an orchestrator, and he hired me as his assistant based on my work in the class. So that's what happened. And I went over and back a fair bit, working on different projects. Then I went over to work with him, but it wasn't until years later that I moved. I was offered a teaching position by UCLA Extension. I strangely enough, I taught conducting on the UCLA on-campus version of the course I took in Dublin, which is completely unrelated but bizarre. And I was working on some of these games, and I did a lot of freebies where I taught a masterclass in conducting your own work and conducting for screen for the Society of Composers and Lyricists. And a couple of the main music directors in Los Angeles were in the audience. And that's how I got some of my first jobs. I didn't know anybody. You know, what you know versus who you know. Eimear didn't know anybody. But it was a hard start. It was hard. Yeah.
So would you recommend for maybe someone who wants to be a composer in film that they stay in Ireland and build up their, I suppose, their portfolio first of all, or that they make the leap and go to the States and try it out there?
I think that depends on your personality and your circumstances. Now, I set up an orchestra and ran it for 5 years before I left. I had programmed concert after concert of film music.
The Dublin City concert.
Yes, I did.
Gillian Saunders.
With Jill, yeah. So one of my classmates and I in second year in Trinity, we set up the orchestra. And that was kind of a PhD in how an orchestra works. I did literally every job, from doing takedown by ear of parts, to photocopying parts, to creating our own parts, to calling Franz Waxman's son in Los Angeles and renting Braveheart from him, you know, and just crazy. I learned about music publishers, I learned about promoters, I learned about venues, I learned about orchestra management and HR, I learned about all of these things, and I thought, maybe one day I'll show up and the orchestra will just be there. And now when I show up in the orchestra and all the work is done for me, all I have to do is the music, I still have sort of like a smirk, as in, I didn't do any of this. I didn't do any of this work. I'm just showing up with the score and upbeat and let's go, you know. So I was ready in lots of regards in terms of having built up experience, and yes, I had already written and recorded a lot of music. But I would rather people did it in a less stressful way than I did it, you know, have built up more. But going into one of these programs is a fantastic way to get right into the center of the industry. I have a beautiful composer friend called Eimear Noone, who's doing gangbusters in Los Angeles right now. And she was a classical violinist, studied in Vienna, left Ireland fairly young, but ended up in Columbia College Chicago. I was teaching a semester, that's where we met. And I said to her, look, when you get to LA, roll up your sleeves, volunteer, and you know, just be there, helping out every way you can. I showed up to a rehearsal there. She was handing out parts, and now she's superstar sailing. But she did all of those things, and they got plonked into the center of the industry. So that's a really, it's a healthier, less stressful way. And there's a brilliant woman, Sarah Glennan, running the Irish Screen Composers Guild, and there was no Sarah when I was a student. So now I have a wonderful assistant who I love. She's a fantastic composer, and it's because of the Screen Composers Guild that we did that. And she doesn't have to leave home. We're doing it for her, and eventually, if she wants to do that, she has a safe environment in which to do it. So Ireland is different now.
You set up the Dublin City Concert Orchestra and you played movie music, and there are so many great film scores out there. So accepting your own, because obviously you can't pick one of those as a favourite, do you have a favourite movie theme?
There's so many. I can tell you the first score I noticed that made me want to become a composer, and I think it's not one people normally choose. They normally choose a John Williams score, and I love John to pieces. He's amazing, a lovely, lovely man. But the first score I noticed was Willow, which is a James Horner score.
Yeah, I love that
And it impacted me differently, because I grew up in an area that's really rich in trad music, but trad music wasn't my first love. My first love was the orchestra. Randomly, for no reason, the first time I saw an orchestra on TV, I fell in love. I was about 7, and I remember it. So here was a composer taking, and I could hear there's like shakuhachi in there, but there's also some whistles, some Irish tin whistles as we call them, in there with the orchestra, and it kind of blew my mind, because I was like, hang on, you're allowed to do that? You're allowed to take trad instruments and put them with the orchestra? And I was only little, and it was amazing. The other one that the other two that made impacts on me as a kid were Last the Mohicans and Matrix, when the Matrix came out, because the Matrix score was so different to everything around it. And these 3 scores, I've performed all of them. And I have performed John Williams music for John Williams. And Don Davis's, yeah. No pressure at all, because he's a conductor as well, so he knows exactly the pain, he knows exactly what I'm dealing with. But that's one thing about the Academy Awards. I was asked, who did you meet? And people always meant actors. For me, the biggest thing was knowing that I was performing Thomas Newman for Thomas Newman, and John Williams for John Williams, and Randy Newman for Randy Newman. And this was what was meaningful to me, because I was doing it as a student in Dublin, performing, trying to get all my college mates to play these pieces, and there were scores that hadn't been performed in Ireland previously. So that's what we were trying to do, bring in the Bravehearts and we did the first, believe it or not, Batman, the Danny Elfman stuff. Yes. But getting to, like, first time I met Don Davis, I got to say to him, listen, I, as a kid, watched Matrix, and I couldn't wait for the film to be over, because all I wanted to see was the credits and wait to see who wrote the score. And I did, during COVID, we had to get a concert together. We had 3 weeks to put a big concert together for the National Symphony Orchestra. And we couldn't be dealing with publishers and getting scores and everything. So I went to the composers, and Don gave me his Matrix Symphony. When I met Don, we spent a month talking to each other purely through the medium of limericks. All of our emails had to be in the form of a limerick, back and forth. That's how the conversation went. Composers are odd, we're mental. So I called Don and I said, can I have your Matrix Symphony, which is brilliant, I love it. At Fumu City a few years ago, Trevor Jones was there, and I got to do, on that same concert I did Willow, but I did his, so Willow was on the programme, James Horner, but for Trevor, I got this call a few days before I was to leave for the festival. The festival organisers going, Trevor can't make rehearsal, can you conduct his portion of the concert? And I was like, that's an extra 45 minutes of music, thanks lads, okay, sure, it's already 3 hours long. So I got to meet this South African gent, absolute gent, and we did 3 of his scores. We did some of Excalibur, we did the one he did with the creature shop. Oh my gosh, we did Labyrinth. We did, what else did we do? We did Merlin. No, he did Merlin that day. What else did I do of his? But we even had we had early instruments doing Excalibur, and we did. It was just fantastic, and to get to do these things where the composers are present, and to work with the composers and be one of the composers or be the orchestrator. Javier Navarrete was the composer of Pan's Labyrinth, and I got to be his orchestrator on The Hole and on Mirrors. And we worked with Joe Dante, who was the director of Gremlins on The Whole. And, for me, it was fascinating being an orchestrator, because then you get to work with composers and really learn to compose from the inside. And conducting is learning orchestration from the inside and being around this music your whole life, and being inside of it your whole life.
It's absolutely amazing. I'd say I'd love to meet John Williams or Howard Shore.
Well, I'll tell you a fun story, a John story. So first time I met him, it was like we both of us were reduced each other to 12-year-olds straight away. A friend of mine said, Eimear just worked the Dallas Symphony, and he was being very poised and very composed, very the icon. And then he goes, "You were at Dallas?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was." He goes, "Were you at Morrison Hall?" And I said, "Yeah, I was." And he goes, "What do you think acoustic?" And I was like, "It's really different. It's really lovely." And he goes, "What do you think of the brass?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a unique flavour, blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "And was the new concertmaster there?" "No, she's starting in September." And everyone around us were like, "What are they talking about?" And it was just this head-to-head, like rapid fire buzz around. But before the Academy Awards, there's a party for the music nominees, and in that room, everybody there is one of the main studio musicians, or a composer, or a music producer, or a lyricist. The music nominees are chosen by the music branch of the Academy. And all the music branch of the Academy are there, and the nominees are given a commemorative baton. Now, John Williams could build a house out of them at this stage, right? So he goes up to get it, and he's always such a gent, and he's so gracious. I really think you can hear the composer's personality in the music. And he's so fascinated by the orchestra and by music constantly. So he goes and he takes his baton, and somebody from the audience shouts up, "Happy birthday, maestro!" And instantly, the whole room starts singing "Happy Birthday," and he takes out the baton and starts conducting us all, singing "Happy Birthday" to him. And we were all geeking out. It was so embarrassing, but it was so fun. And it was just, I'm like, where are all the cameras now? This is a music history moment. And I've been there when he and Itzhak Perlman were absolutely ribbing each other. There's only about 40, 50 people in the room, and they're talking about Schindler's List, and it was the year Memoirs of a Geisha was nominated, and Perlman is in his little scooter because his mobility is not great, and he's talking, "I get this call from this guy John Williams, the guitarist, no, the composer," and he's going on. They're just totally slagging each other off. I'm standing next to them in this guy's living room going, "Why isn't my brain a video recorder? Why can't I record this with my brain right now?" I'm seeing Itzhak Perlman and John Williams. I'm standing right next to them, slag each other off. Like, people wouldn't believe this. This is crazy. But it's a mad ride.
That's fantastic. Now, obviously, not everyone would be as familiar with composers. So at the Oscars, you also got to meet a lot of famous female actors or actresses. I'm never quite sure what the correct terminology is at the moment. So, because obviously we're talking Comic-Con, you've met Gal Gadot, who plays Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
And Brie Larson, who's Captain Marvel, and Sigourney Weaver, who's Ripley. Did you have, female heroes growing up? Were there superheroes that you kind of looked up to and went, "This is what I want to be"?
I loved Wonder Woman. I had the bracelets on a Saturday morning going, choo, choo, definitely. And I loved Star Trek, actually. I wasn't a Trekkie, but I watched it as a kid. I love Star Trek. I love the women on there. But Wonder Woman was definitely, when we were out in the yard, on a Saturday acting out superheroes. I was Wonder Woman, and often my brother was Barry McGuigan, who randomly I met the other day for the first time. And I was like, my brother was always you on a Saturday, you know, when I was Wonder Woman, you know. I told him, I was like, he was always Barry McGuigan. He was like, he loved hearing that. But yeah, so Wonder Woman definitely, I loved Sigourney Weaver in everything, and Alien, I loved her in everything. But at the awards, I didn't actually know the three girls were going to introduce me, because in rehearsal they had stand-in actors, and I never pay attention to things that aren't what I have to worry about. It's like, oh, it's somebody else's problem, you know, and I'm just waiting for my cue to go. So in the actual moment, in the pit, I have a monitor that I'm watching as well. And I'm, you know, I daren't look too high. I get vertigo as well. So I used to work for the Los Angeles Ballet, and I would get vertigo looking up from the pit into the stage. So I wasn't looking up the stage, I was looking at the monitor in front of me. The next thing I see these three come out, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, waiting for cue. That's interesting. And then I'm like, are they talking? Oh my God, did they, what? So it was a lovely moment, because it was a surprise. I didn't know. And the two producers of the Academy Awards are class act Stephanie Lane, who remortgaged her house to fund her film Hustle and Flow, and Lynette Howell-Taylor, who had just finished nursing her youngest baby a week before the awards, which is the type of mad women that I definitely, I can definitely get their vibe, you know, and they're very inspirational women, the two of them. But there were a few surprises in there. There was that surprise for me. Stephanie Lane surprised her best friend, who was sitting next to Craig at the awards, by bringing in Eminem as a surprise that night. So he wasn't there in rehearsal. I was there for all Elton John's rehearsals and everybody else's, but Idina Menzel and everybody, but he wasn't at rehearsal. And the weird thing is, I have two songs I listen to before I go out on stage, always. Doesn't matter if it's Maria Callas opera, if it's whatever the music is, doesn't matter. It's either Back in Black, which relaxes me and gets me in touch with my rhythmic core and everything, and it's a fun one. But if I have a really intense, really stressful one, really stressful concert, a real tightrope, I listen to Lose Yourself by Eminem. You know, you got to lose yourself in the music. The moment you own it, you better never let it go. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. The opportunity comes once in a lifetime. Yo, that's the rhyming word. But I will listen to that at the most stressful times, because I need to be reminded you're only as good as your last performance, and the opportunity might only come once, you know, and you got to seize the day, and you got to live in the music, because this is who we are. And sometimes you need to be brought back to that. And I'm sitting here backstage looking at the screen in the dressing room, waiting for my bit, and when I'm going to get called on, and I'm going, what will I do now? Will I do a bit of meditation? Will I listen to, what will I do? Will I listen to, oh my God, Lose Yourself. Where is it coming from? It's on the telly in front of me. He's on the stage doing the song. And it's like, if I never ever needed a sign from my dad that I was going to be okay, it was a live version of the song I listen to when I'm really, really stressed before a big performance. In the flesh, on the stage right before I go out.
When you were invited to conduct, did you realise that you were the first woman in 92 years to actually conduct the Oscars?
I didn't, it was really one of those things. You work really hard for 20 years, and then all of a sudden you get this one phone call, and Los Angeles was the incubator for my career, you know, and that's a lot of the musicians in the orchestra I would have worked with before, and you know, I would have, you don't just get asked unless they know that you have the wherewithal to take the pressure and to carry the massive amount of pressure and go out and take that on and not just do it, but inhabit the moment, not just survive it and get through it. but to really own the moment. And I had worked with the music director for the Oscars and the Grammys on another small project. I had worked with the principal arranger on a couple of things, and you know, they've seen you in the trenches and they've seen you in action, and there's also a notoriously difficult project that I was touring called the Maria Callas Hologram Project, which was fabulous and magical, but extraordinarily technically difficult. So it was a culmination of all these things. So I was home in Ireland because we came home to do 2x2 Overboard and score that and everything. And I get an email saying from the music director saying, what's your availability between these dates? And my husband, who is, the glass isn't half full, the glass is all the way full, all the time, which is infuriating for, you know, a brooding Irish artist, you know, comes to me and goes, oh, you got an email from Ricky, and I bet he wants you to conduct at the Oscars. I'm like, how do you get from where's your availability to, he could be sending me off to do, or asking me for a consult on, or blah, 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 or whatever. And he called me to tell me I was on a short list. And when I heard who else was on the short list, I heard the names of a lot of people that I love and who are extremely capable and extremely, you know, members of the Academy, and you know, people with a lot of very big political, let's say, political capital, which I have this much, you know. The who you know thing, and I said, oh well, it's great to be considered, thanks very much. You know, thinking, oh jeepers Scott, well, it's nice to know people are thinking of you and that you're on the list. But he called me back, you know, left me to stew for a few days, and it was one of those things where it was equal parts terrifying to get the gig and terrifying to not get the gig, you know. So that's when you know you're in the right place for you. It's not a phone it in, same old. It's I'm too neurotic to phone anything in anyway. But this is your moment of pushing you out of your comfort zone. It's as terrifying to get it as not to get it. And he called me back. He called me. I didn't know when he was going to call back, but he called me and. He said, Eimear, well, we had to make this decision, and he tried to act up the preamble, and it lasted about 2 seconds. He goes, welcome to the Oscars 2020. I was like, oh my God, you devil.
So Eimear, obviously you went to the Oscars, you conducted the Oscars, and you got to wear a fabulous dress, which is going to be on display here at Ballinasloe Library. You've also given us a number of other pieces to put on display, including some of the scores that you've worked on. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I really collect is Starbucks mugs from the cities I've performed in, and the scores that I've worked on. So we will be we'll be showing some of the original scores from the Blizzard Activision sessions, just for perusal. I have the baton that I used at the Academy Awards, which has Mr. Oscar carved into it, and my signature. We have a couple of first pages from scores, and the Claire Garvey piece from the Academy Awards, which is really special because Claire and I have been collaborating for a few years now. And the first piece I asked Claire to create, I said, you know, if Mozart were to meet a video game heroine on the way to a Metallica concert, what would that look like? And Claire is like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. There you go. And straight away you're like, whoa, that is exactly what that looks like. Thank you very much. So when this came up, I said, you know, instead of having one Irish artist on the podium, why don't we have two? So if I am wearing the work of an Irish designer, then there are two Irish women present. And straight away, the first person I called to tell them I was going to the Oscars with my mother, and the second was Claire Garvey. So I said, Claire, we're going to the Oscars, Claire, you know, and she's crying and jumping up and down, and that's her, and she, you know, I hope it's just for me, but I know she's like that with everyone she works with. She's a star. But a producer friend of mine said, you know, it must be gold. She said, this is a moment for women of music, and you can't hide behind the black. You can't, you know, you must step out and you must step up to the moment. So I was like, oh gosh, okay, I'll call Claire. And I called Claire and I said, look, we've never done this colour before, but, and I said, can we try gold? And she said, I can't believe you're saying that to me. She goes, I have a mannequin set up in the living room. I've already started it. It's gold. I always say to Claire we should get matching cauldrons because we're both a bit witchy. So, as you know, we talked about Grace O'Malley and how the spirit of that woman is on all Irish women. So there's a little bit Grace O'Malley influence in the piece. She created one before for me where I said, you know, one of my favourite Grace O'Malley stories is where she goes to meet Queen Elizabeth and has the dagger hidden in her bodice. And Elizabeth's security, basically, for want of a better word, find it. And Elizabeth's reaction is, well, I suppose I would have done the same. So I have one that actually has like a dagger piece right in the bodice. But this also has that Grace O'Malley Granuaile influence. And a really funny thing happened with the piece. First of all, Aer Lingus, Captain Elaine Agnew, and her first mate Amy had kept it in the cockpit because I couldn't. It's leather, it's gold leather, it's really heavy and stiff, and I couldn't put it in a suitcase. So they brought it up. It flew in the cockpit to the Academy Awards, flown by Captain Elaine, and so the Irish women were bringing the work of the Irish women to the Academy Awards, and that meant a lot to me. Going out on stage, knowing that I had all these women lifting me up in that moment, and I felt that this isn't about me. I'm just inhabiting this moment for others, and it was amazing. But the Irish women were all over it. My friend Fanula opened her boutique in Portmarnock to throw clothes at me for all the other events because I'd returned from a concert in Doha with a suitcase full of laundry and no clothes to go to LA. Opened her shop on a Sunday. My aunt bought my shoes. My other aunt did my hair. I mean, it was just Marana Heron. But yeah, so Claire's piece is really special. Oh yes, a cookie company in the United States, if every supermarket you go into has Milano cookies. And they ran an ad campaign called Best Dressed Cookies for the Academy Awards. There were 4 cookies. One was a Calvin Klein piece that my colleague wore, who was on stage before me, and then there was Claire's piece. So they made a cookie that looked like Claire's piece that we were going to show here in the library in Ballinasloe. So the photographs are out there somewhere. They sent her a framed cookie, but that was their ad campaign. So they picked 4 pieces from the entire 92nd Academy Awards, and one of them was Claire. So we were the best dressed cookie.
Eimear, thank you so much for coming along today. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you, and for you to give us so much time and such great advice for anyone who's interested in composing, who wants to get involved, and also I think for people who are into film and video games to understand the level of work that goes in behind the scenes. So thank you